The snow had soaked through Arya's boots 3 miles back, and now each step sent needles of ice shooting up through her swollen ankles. She pressed one hand against her belly, feeling the baby shift restlessly beneath her palm, and forced herself to keep moving toward the lights of the village she'd spotted from the ridge. 7 months pregnant. 3 weeks since she'd buried Adrian in that shallow grave behind their cabin, and 16 days since she'd started running from the brother who'd murdered him. Her wolf stirred weakly inside her, exhausted from the constant flight, from the grief that had nearly shattered them both when she'd found Adrian's body cooling on their kitchen floor. "Keep moving," the wolf urged, though her voice was barely a whisper now. "The pup needs warmth, medicine, safety." Arya stumbled over a hidden root and caught herself against a pine tree, bark scraping her already raw palms. The baby kicked hard, a sharp jab beneath her ribs that made her gasp. "I know," she whispered, breath fogging in the frigid air. "I know, little one. We're almost there. Just a little further." She'd been saying that for days now. The Thornwood territory was 300 miles behind her, but Dante's hunters had driven her north, away from the allied packs who might have sheltered her. She'd crossed into neutral territory 2 days ago, following rumors of a small pack settlement that welcomed travelers. The Silver Creek Pack, they called themselves. Surely they would help a pregnant widow. Surely they would have a healer who could check on the baby, make sure all the running and the fear and the frozen nights hadn't caused any damage. The thought of something being wrong with her child made Arya's chest constrict so tightly she couldn't breathe. This baby was all she had left of Adrian, his last gift to her, conceived in love, growing beneath her heart while the world fell apart around them. She remembered his hands on her belly just days before he died, his amber eyes soft with wonder as he felt their daughter kick for the first time. "She's going to be strong like her mother," he'd said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Brave and beautiful and fierce." And then Dante had come. Arya shoved the memory away, burying it deep where it couldn't paralyze her, and pushed off from the tree. The village was closer now, perhaps half a mile. She could see individual buildings through the trees. A general store, what looked like a tavern with warm light spilling from its windows. And there, set slightly apart from the others, a building marked with the Universal Healer's symbol. Thank the gods. She made herself walk faster despite the pain in her feet, despite the exhaustion dragging at every muscle. The baby needed this. She needed this. 2 weeks of running on little food and less sleep, constantly looking over her shoulder for Dante's wolves, had pushed her body to its limits. Her ankles were swollen, her back ached with a deep, constant throb, and she'd felt strange twinges in her abdomen that terrified her. The clinic's door was heavier than it looked, but Arya managed to shoulder it open and stumble inside. Warmth hit her like a physical force, making her knees buckle slightly before she caught herself on the reception desk. A young woman behind the counter looked up with wide eyes, taking in Arya's snow-crusted hair, her ragged traveling cloak, her obviously pregnant belly. "I need—" Arya's voice cracked, rusty from disuse. She'd barely spoken in weeks, had no one to speak to. "Please, I need to see the healer. I'm pregnant and I've been traveling and something feels wrong." The receptionist's expression had shifted from surprise to something cooler, more assessing. Her nostrils flared as she scented the air, and Arya saw the exact moment she noticed the faded mate mark on Arya's neck, the mark that had begun to gray at the edges after Adrian's death, advertising her widowed status to any wolf who cared to look. "Wait here," the woman said, and disappeared through a door behind the desk. Arya leaned heavily against the counter, one hand pressed to her belly. The baby was quiet now, as if sensing her mother's anxiety, and that silence frightened Arya more than any amount of movement would have. "It's okay," she whispered, rubbing small circles over the stretched skin. "We're going to be okay. Someone's going to help us." She wanted desperately to believe it. The door opened again, and the receptionist emerged, followed by an older man in healer's robes. He had gray streaking his brown hair and deep lines bracketing his mouth, and he looked at Arya the way one might look at something unpleasant scraped off the bottom of a boot. "This is her?" he asked the receptionist, not bothering to address Arya directly. "Yes, Dr. Henshaw. She just wandered in off the mountain." Henshaw circled the counter to examine Arya more closely. She straightened as much as her aching back would allow, trying not to show how much his cold assessment unnerved her. His eyes lingered on her faded mark, on the dirt ground into her clothing, on the visible evidence of her hard journey. "How far along?" he asked curtly. "7 months. Please, I just need someone to check on the baby. Make sure everything is—" "Where's your pack? Your mate?" The questions hit like physical blows. Arya forced herself to answer steadily. "My mate is dead. I'm traveling alone." "Dead." Henshaw's lip curled. "And his pack just let you wander off into the wilderness? Pregnant and unmated?" How could she explain? How could she tell this stranger that her mate's pack had become her death warrant? That the new alpha wanted to murder her child? "There were complications. I had to leave." "Complications?" He made the word sound filthy. "I'm sure there were. A mated female doesn't just run off alone unless she's done something to deserve exile." Arya felt her wolf surge weakly against the exhaustion, hackles rising at the insult. "I didn't do anything. My mate was murdered and I—" "Spare me." Henshaw held up a hand, cutting her off. "I've heard every story you rogues come up with. Poor little widow, all alone, needing charity from honest pack wolves." He looked her up and down with obvious disgust. "For all I know, that pup doesn't even belong to your supposed mate. Could be any mongrel's get." The words stole Arya's breath. She actually staggered backward, hand flying to her belly as if she could shield her daughter from such venom. "How dare you—" "How dare I? You come into my clinic, reeking of rogue and desperation, and expect me to use my time and resources on the likes of you." Henshaw laughed, a harsh bark of sound. "I treat pack wolves. Respectable wolves. Not roguish trash who couldn't keep their mates alive and probably spread their legs for any passing. My mate died protecting me." The words tore from Arya's throat raw and ragged. "He was murdered by his own brother. Murdered because he wouldn't hand me over. And I have been running for my life for weeks, trying to keep our daughter safe. All I'm asking for is 5 minutes of your time to make sure she's healthy, please." For a moment, she thought she saw something flicker in Henshaw's eyes. Discomfort, perhaps, or a shadow of shame. But it vanished quickly, replaced by cold dismissal. "Not my problem," he said flatly. "You want help? Find whatever pack will have you and beg them to take you in. Maybe if you're lucky, some alpha will be desperate enough to claim used goods." He jerked his chin toward the door. "Now get out of my clinic before your stench drives away my actual patients." Arya stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. She had expected suspicion, perhaps, or wariness. Rogues often received a chilly reception from settled packs. But this open cruelty, this casual dismissal of her and her child as worthless? The receptionist appeared at her elbow, fingers closing around Arya's arm with unnecessary force. "You heard the doctor. Time to leave." "But the baby—" "Should have thought about that before you got yourself into trouble." The woman began steering Arya toward the door, ignoring her attempts to resist. "The Silver Creek Pack doesn't waste resources on your kind." The door opened, and cold air blasted across Arya's face. She had one moment to brace herself before the receptionist shoved her through, sending her stumbling down the clinic's front steps. She landed hard on her hands and knees in the snow, the impact jarring through her swollen belly and pulling a cry of pain from her lips. The door slammed shut behind her. Arya knelt there in the snow, too shocked to move, too exhausted to cry. Her palms burned where they'd scraped against ice and gravel. Her knees ached, and deep in her belly the baby was kicking frantically, as if sensing her mother's distress and trying to comfort her in the only way she could. "Get up," her wolf urged, but the voice was fading, weakening with every passing moment. "You have to get up. You can't stay here." She knew that. She knew the cold would kill her if she didn't find shelter. Knew that Dante's hunters could still be on her trail. Knew that every moment she spent kneeling in the snow was a moment of danger for her daughter. But for the first time since she'd started running, Arya couldn't make herself move. The cold was seeping into her bones now, numbing her fingers where they pressed against the ground. Snow was falling again, fat flakes that caught in her hair and settled on her eyelashes. She could feel her body beginning to shut down, exhaustion and heartbreak and grief finally overwhelming her will to survive. Adrian, she thought, and the name was a prayer and a sob and a plea all at once. Adrian, I'm sorry. I tried. I tried so hard. Her arms gave out, and she slumped sideways into the snow. The last thing she was aware of before darkness claimed her was the sound of horses approaching, the jingle of harnesses and the creak of wheels, and voices, startled voices, urgent voices, calling out in alarm. Then there was only cold and silence and the faint flutter of her daughter's heartbeat keeping time with her own fading pulse. Consciousness returned in fragments. Warmth first, blessed warmth enveloping her frozen limbs like a cocoon. Then softness. She was lying on something cushioned, padded. Nothing like the hard ground she'd been sleeping on for weeks. There were sounds, too. Quiet voices speaking in hushed tones. And beneath everything, a strange humming sensation that seemed to resonate deep in her bones. Arya opened her eyes. She was inside a carriage. No, not just a carriage. This was something grander, more luxurious, with velvet-cushioned benches and silver lanterns casting warm light across polished wooden panels. She was lying on one of the benches, wrapped in what felt like a dozen fur blankets, and someone had removed her wet boots and replaced them with thick woolen socks. Two figures sat across from her, watching her with identical expressions of wonder. They were both women, both wearing robes of deep blue marked with symbols Arya didn't recognize. The older one had silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun, while the younger couldn't have been more than 20, with bright copper curls and wide green eyes. "She's awake," the younger one breathed. "I can see that, Eliza." The older woman leaned forward, and Arya instinctively shrank back against the cushions. "Easy, child. You're safe now. No one here will harm you." "Where?" Arya's throat was raw, her voice barely a whisper. "Where am I? Who are you?" "My name is Helene. This is my apprentice, Eliza. We're healers of the royal court, traveling on business for His Majesty." Helene's eyes were kind but sharp, missing nothing. "We were passing through Silver Creek when we found you collapsed in the snow outside their clinic. You were nearly frozen solid. Another few minutes and—" She shook her head. "Well, the gods were watching over you tonight." "Royal court." The words barely registered through Arya's confusion. "The clinic wouldn't help me. They called me—" She stopped, the memory of Henshaw's sneering voice too painful to repeat. "We know." Helene's voice hardened. "We spoke with the innkeeper after we brought you into the carriage. She told us what happened. Rest assured, the Silver Creek Pack will be answering to the Crown for their treatment of a pregnant female." The Crown, His Majesty, Royal Court. Slowly, terrifyingly, understanding began to dawn. "You're from the Alpha King's territory?" "We serve Alpha King Theron Shadowfang directly," Eliza confirmed, practically bouncing with excitement. "We're his personal healers. Helene has been with him for nearly 200 years. "Eliza." Helene's tone was quelling. "The poor girl just regained consciousness. Let's not overwhelm her." But Arya was barely listening. Alpha King Theron Shadowfang. She knew that name. Every wolf in the realm knew that name. The Shadowfang line had ruled the northern kingdoms for over 1,000 years, and Theron himself had sat the throne for 4 centuries, the most powerful Alpha ever born. His territory was vast, his army legendary, his court the stuff of whispered stories, and his healers had found her dying in the snow. I can't. Arya struggled to sit up, panic rising in her chest. I have to leave. I can't go with you. There are people looking for me, dangerous people, and if I bring trouble to the Alpha King's doorstep. Lie down. Helene's hand pressed against Arya's shoulder, gentle but firm. You're in no condition to go anywhere. And as for trouble, she exchanged a glance with Eliza that Arya couldn't interpret. I think you'd be surprised what kind of trouble the Alpha King can handle. You don't understand. The man hunting me, we'll discuss it later. For now, you need rest, and your child needs care. Helene's hand moved to Arya's belly, hovering just above the swell without quite touching. May I? Arya hesitated, thinking of Henshaw's cruelty, his sneering dismissal. But there was nothing cold in Helene's eyes, nothing judging in her steady gaze. And the baby, gods. The baby hadn't moved since Arya had woken up, and that terrified her more than anything else. Please, she whispered. Helene's palm pressed against her belly, and immediately that strange humming sensation intensified, resonating through Arya's body like the plucked string of an instrument. The healer's eyes fell closed, her expression going distant, focused. For a long moment there was only silence. Then Helene's eyes flew open, and she snatched her hand back as if Arya's skin had burned her. Helene? Eliza's voice was sharp with concern. What is it? What's wrong? Helene was staring at Arya's belly with an expression Arya couldn't read. Shock, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like awe. The child, she breathed. There's something ancient stirring in this child. Power I haven't felt in centuries, not since... She cut herself off, shaking her head sharply. We need to return to the palace. Immediately. What? Eliza looked between Helene and Arya with obvious confusion. But we haven't finished our inspection of the northern clinics. The king ordered. The king will forgive the delay when he sees what we found. Helene was already moving, rapping sharply on the carriage wall to get the driver's attention. Turn us around. We ride for Shadowfang Keep, and we don't stop until we get there. Arya felt her heart beginning to race, fear spiking through her exhaustion. What do you mean, something ancient? What's wrong with my baby? Please, just tell me she's healthy. Tell me she's going to be okay. Helene turned back to her, and some of the alarm in her expression softened into something gentler. Your daughter is healthy. More than healthy. She's thriving. But there's something more. Something I don't fully understand. She paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. Your child carries power, girl. Old power. The kind that hasn't been seen in these lands for generations. The kind that the king himself will want to know about. The carriage lurched into motion, and Arya felt the world tilting beneath her. She pressed both hands to her belly, feeling her daughter stir at last. A strong kick, then another, as if the baby was responding to the healer's touch. What are you, little one? She thought desperately. What did your father pass down to you? But there were no answers in the dark, only the rattle of wheels on frozen ground and the murmur of 2 royal healers discussing power and prophecy and the ancient bloodlines of the Wolf Kingdom. And somewhere ahead, drawing closer with every mile, the throne of the Alpha King waited. The carriage traveled through the night without stopping, and Arya drifted in and out of an exhausted sleep, punctuated by strange dreams. She dreamed of Adrian, his amber eyes soft with love as he cradled her face in his hands. She dreamed of Dante, his twisted smile as he stood over his brother's body. And she dreamed of something else, something vast and golden, a presence that pulled at her like the tide pulling at the shore, inexorable and ancient and utterly unknown. When she woke fully, weak winter sunlight was streaming through the carriage windows, and Eliza was pressing a warm cup into her hands. Broth, the young healer said, her copper curls bouncing as the carriage swayed over uneven ground. You need to eat something. For the baby. Arya accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her cold fingers around its warmth. The broth was rich and savory, and she felt strength seeping back into her limbs with every sip. Her daughter kicked appreciatively, a strong flutter beneath her ribs that made Arya smile despite everything. How long was I asleep? Nearly 8 hours. We're almost there now. Eliza leaned toward the window, her expression brightening with obvious excitement. Look, you can see the keep from here. Arya shifted on the bench, craning her neck to peer through the frost-edged glass, and her breath caught in her throat. Shadowfang Keep rose from the mountains like something carved from the bones of the earth itself. Its black stone towers pierced the gray sky, their peaks lost in swirling clouds, while massive walls circled a sprawling complex of buildings that seemed to go on forever. Banners bearing the Shadowfang crest, a silver wolf howling beneath a crescent moon, snapped in the bitter wind. The entire structure radiated power and permanence, a fortress that had stood for 1,000 years and would stand for 1,000 more. It was the most intimidating thing Arya had ever seen. The king has already been notified of our return, Helene said from across the carriage. The older healer had been silent for most of the journey, lost in thought. But now her sharp eyes were fixed on Arya with an intensity that made her want to shrink back into the cushions. He's curious about what we found. About you. Arya's hand moved instinctively to her belly. I don't understand what you sensed in my daughter. My mate. My late mate. He was a beta in his pack. The Thornwood name is old, but Adrian never showed any sign of special power. Old names carry dormant gifts, Helene said thoughtfully. Sometimes power sleeps for generations, waiting for the right catalyst. What about your side? Your parents? Your grandparents? Do you know anything about your family history? Arya shook her head helplessly. I was orphaned as a child, raised by the Thornwood pack after my parents died in a rogue attack. No one ever spoke of where I came from. Then it's possible your bloodline carries something too. Two dormant lines meeting, awakening what neither could produce alone. Helene exchanged another of those unreadable glances with Eliza. Well, the king will have questions for you. I suggest you answer them honestly. The carriage passed through the outer gates, and Arya felt the weight of ancient wards pressing against her skin, protective magic so powerful it made her teeth ache. Wolves in royal livery stood at attention as they passed, their eyes tracking the carriage with obvious curiosity. Word had spread, it seemed. Word about the half-frozen pregnant widow the royal healers had dragged home like a stray cat. When the carriage finally stopped, Arya's legs were trembling so badly she could barely stand. Eliza helped her down, steadying her with a gentle hand, and Arya found herself standing in a vast courtyard paved with dark stone. More wolves surrounded them, guards, servants, officials in fine clothing, all staring, all whispering. She pulled her ragged cloak tighter around her shoulders, painfully aware of how she must look. Dirty, exhausted, faded mate mark advertising her widowed status for all to see. Her belly swelling with a fatherless child. Roguish trash. The words echoed in her mind, and she felt her chin lifting in defiance. She might be all those things, widow, rogue, refugee, but she was also a mother protecting her child, and she would not cower before these strangers. Helene stepped forward, beckoning. Come, the king is waiting. The interior of Shadowfang Keep was as imposing as its exterior, all soaring ceilings and stone corridors lit by flickering torches. Arya followed Helene through a maze of hallways, trying not to stare at the tapestries depicting legendary Shadowfang victories or the ancient suits of armor standing sentinel in alcoves. Everything here spoke of power and history and permanence, things that had been stripped from her the moment Dante had driven his claws into Adrian's heart. They climbed a wide staircase, passed through doors guarded by wolves who snapped to attention at Helene's approach, and finally emerged into an antechamber hung with silver and blue. A massive door stood at the far end, carved with intricate wolf motifs that seemed to move in the torchlight. "Wait here," Helene instructed, disappearing through the door and leaving Arya alone with Eliza. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of a fire burning in a nearby hearth. Arya pressed her hand to her belly, feeling her daughter shift restlessly. The baby had been unusually active since they'd entered the keep, and that strange humming sensation that Helene's touch had awakened seemed to have intensified, vibrating through Arya's bones like a tuning fork. "It'll be all right," Eliza whispered, though she didn't sound entirely certain. "The king he's stern, but he won't harm you." Before Arya could respond, the carved door swung open and Helene emerged. "He'll see you now." Arya's feet felt like lead as she walked toward the door. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee this place of power and find somewhere quiet and safe to have her child. But there was nowhere safe, not with Dante hunting her. And this, somehow, had become her only option. She stepped through the door, and the world shifted beneath her feet. The throne room was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow despite the hundreds of candles burning in iron chandeliers. More banners hung from the walls, the silver wolf seeming to watch her from every direction. A carpet of deep blue stretched toward a raised dais, where a massive throne carved from black stone dominated the space. And on that throne sat the Alpha King. Arya's first impression was of size. He was enormous, even seated, his broad shoulders and powerful frame making the massive throne look almost delicate. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, falling past his shoulders, and his features were hard as the mountains surrounding his keep. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, a mouth that looked as though it had forgotten how to smile. He wore black and silver, the colors of his house, and a circlet of twisted metal rested on his brow. But it was his eyes that stopped Arya in her tracks. They were gray as storm clouds, as winter ice, as the blade of a sword, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that stole her breath. She felt those eyes moving over her, cataloging every detail of her appearance, and she fought the urge to wrap her arms around her belly protectively. "So," his voice was deep and cold, echoing through the vast space. "This is the refugee my healers have brought me, the one carrying a child of ancient power." Arya forced herself to speak, though her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Your Majesty, I'm grateful for the kindness your healers showed me. I know I have no right to." She took a step forward as she spoke, and her foot caught on the edge of the carpet. Exhaustion and weakness conspired against her, and she felt herself pitching forward, arms pinwheeling helplessly as she tried to catch her balance. She never hit the ground. One moment she was falling, the next she was suspended in midair, caught by hands that had moved faster than her eye could track. Strong hands, warm hands, hands that gripped her arms with impossible gentleness despite their obvious strength. The Alpha King was standing directly in front of her. He had crossed the entire length of the throne room in the space between heartbeats, had caught her before she could fall, and now he was close. So close that Arya could see the individual flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could smell pine and frost and something wild and masculine that made her head spin. She looked up at him, startled and confused, and still unsteady on her feet. Their eyes met, and heat detonated behind Arya's ribs, so sudden and fierce it buckled her knees. Heat blazed through her veins, sudden and shocking and utterly overwhelming. Her dormant wolf, silent since Adrian's death, surged to life with a howl that echoed through her entire being. The baby kicked violently, harder than she'd ever kicked before, as if recognizing something that Arya's conscious mind refused to accept. The world narrowed to a single point. Those gray eyes, now shot through with veins of burning gold. Time seemed to stop. Arya was aware, distantly, of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She was aware of his hand still gripping her arms, his touch searing through the fabric of her cloak like a brand. She was aware of her wolf screaming a single word over and over with a desperation that bordered on madness. Mate, 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 mate. No, no, that was impossible. She had been mated to Adrian. She had loved Adrian with everything she had. He had died for her, had given his life to protect her and their child, and she had buried him with her own hands only 3 weeks ago. She couldn't. This couldn't. A sound tore from the Alpha King's chest. It was a growl, but like no growl Arya had ever heard. It was primal, possessive, hungry in a way that made something deep in her belly clench with answering heat. His eyes were fully gold now, his wolf surging to the surface, and his grip on her arms tightened almost painfully. Impossible, he rasped, his voice barely human. His nostrils flared as he scented her, and another growl rumbled through him. You're mine. Arya stumbled backward, terror and confusion and something that felt dangerously like desire warring in her chest. I can't. My mate is dead. I buried him. I mourned him. This doesn't make sense. But her wolf was howling in disagreement, straining toward the massive alpha before her with a desperation that made Arya's knees weak. And the heat? Gods, the heat was everywhere now, flooding her veins like liquid fire, pooling low in her belly where her daughter was kicking with renewed frenzy. The Alpha King took a step toward her, and Arya's back hit the carved door. His massive frame blocked out the light from the chandeliers, surrounding her in shadow and warmth, and that intoxicating scent that made her want to bury her face in his chest and breathe deep. I felt you enter my territory, he said, his voice low and rough. I felt the bond wake after 400 years of silence. I thought I was going mad. His eyes, still burning gold, traced over her face like he was memorizing every detail. A second chance, mate, for you, after your loss. I didn't even know the moon goddess could grant such a thing. It's not. Arya's voice trembled. It can't be. I loved Adrian. I still love him. He's only been gone 3 weeks. And I'm carrying his child, and you can't just... We can't... She broke off, because his hand had risen to cup her cheek with a tenderness that stole her breath. His palm was calloused and warm, and where his skin touched hers, electricity arced through her nerve endings like lightning. I know, he said, and some of the wildness faded from his eyes, replaced by something that looked almost like understanding, almost like pain. I know this isn't what you wanted. I know you're grieving and afraid and carrying another male's child. I know that claiming you now would be the act of a monster. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and Arya's eyes fluttered closed without her permission. But you should know, he continued, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper, that I have waited 4 centuries for this. 4 centuries of cold. 4 centuries of loneliness. 4 centuries of ruling this kingdom while something inside me withered and died. His forehead came to rest against hers, and Arya could feel his breath warm on her lips. I will not rush you. I will not force you. But I will not give you up either. Do you understand? Arya's hands had come up to press against his chest, though whether to push him away or pull him closer she couldn't have said. Beneath her palms she could feel his heart pounding, racing just as fast as her own. I don't even know your name, she whispered. A sound that might have been a laugh escaped him, though there was no humor in it. Theron. Theron Shadowfang. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes again. And you are Arya, late of the Thornwood Pack, widow of Adrian, mother of a child with ancient power stirring in her blood. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. My healers were very thorough in their report. Arya opened her mouth to respond. To say what? She didn't know. But at that moment, her daughter kicked again, and Theron's entire body went rigid. His eyes dropped to her belly, where his hand had somehow come to rest without her noticing. The baby kicked a second time, directly against his palm, and the look that crossed his face was one Arya would never forget. Wonder, awe, a desperate, hungry longing that made her heart ache in spite of everything. She knows, he breathed. The child knows. Arya didn't have to ask what he meant. The bond, whatever this impossible bond was, seemed to extend to her daughter as well. The baby had been quiet through all of Arya's flight, through all of her terror. But here, now, with this stranger's hand on her belly, she was kicking with more enthusiasm than she'd shown in weeks, as if she was greeting someone she had been waiting for, as if she was coming home. I need to sit down, Arya heard herself say, and her voice sounded very far away. I think I'm going to faint. Theron caught her before she could sway, sweeping her into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. The world tilted and spun, and then she was cradled against his chest, her face pressed to the warm skin of his throat, his arms holding her steady and secure. He carried her to a chair near the hearth, a massive thing draped in furs, and settled her into it with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his fierce appearance. When he pulled back, his eyes were still gold, but the wildness had faded to something more controlled. Rest, he commanded, though his voice was softer than before. You've traveled far, and you're carrying precious cargo. My servants will prepare a chamber for you. You'll have a hot bath, clean clothes, and a proper meal, whatever you need. Why? The question escaped before Arya could stop it. Why are you being so kind to me? You don't know anything about me. I could be lying about everything. I could be a spy, or a criminal, or... You're my mate. He said it simply, as if that explained everything. Perhaps, to him, it did. That makes you the most important person in this kingdom. Second only to... His eyes dropped to her belly again, and something complicated moved through his expression. Only to her. Arya didn't know what to say to that. She didn't know what to feel. She was exhausted and overwhelmed, and still grieving Adrian, still feeling the fresh wound of his loss every time she breathed. The idea that she could be mate to anyone else, let alone the most powerful alpha in the realm, seemed absurd, impossible, wrong. And yet her wolf was purring contentedly for the first time since Adrian's death. And yet her daughter was calm and still in her belly, as if the baby knew she was finally safe. And yet something deep in Arya's chest, something that had been frozen solid since she'd found Adrian's body, was beginning, ever so slowly, to thaw. Theron straightened, putting distance between them, and Arya felt the loss of his warmth like a physical ache. I'll have Helena tend to you, he said, his voice carefully neutral. She'll want to examine you more thoroughly now that you're rested. And He paused, something uncertain flickering across his features. I will give you space, time, whatever you need to come to terms with this. He turned to leave, and Arya found herself speaking without thinking. Theron. He stopped, looked back at her, and the naked hope in his eyes made her chest constrict. Thank you, she whispered, for catching me. For a moment his expression softened into something almost tender. Then he inclined his head, turned, and strode from the room, leaving Arya alone with the crackling fire and her whirling thoughts and a bond she didn't understand humming steadily through her veins. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Servants appeared to escort her to a massive chamber in the eastern wing, where a fire was already burning and a copper tub filled with steaming water waited before the hearth. They helped her undress, tactfully ignoring the state of her travel-worn clothing and the prominence of her pregnant belly, and eased her into the bath with gentle hands. The hot water was pure bliss. Arya sank into it until only her face was above the surface, letting the heat soak into her aching muscles, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to relax. Helene arrived as Arya was drying off, wrapping herself in a robe of soft blue wool that had been laid out for her. The older healer's expression was carefully neutral, but there was a knowing gleam in her eye that made Arya flush. "I take it the meeting with the king was eventful?" Helene asked. "You knew." It wasn't a question. "When you found me in the snow, you knew what I was to him." Helene inclined her head. "I suspected. The power in your child, the way the king's wards seemed to respond to your presence. It wasn't certain, but I had a feeling." She gestured to the bed, where fresh sheets had been turned down invitingly. "Come, let me examine you properly. The child has been through much, and I want to ensure she's thriving." Arya allowed herself to be guided to the bed, lying back against the pillows, while Helene's hands moved over her belly with practiced expertise. That strange humming sensation returned, stronger now, and Arya watched the healer's face for any sign of concern. "She's healthy," Helene confirmed after a long moment. "Strong. Growing exactly as she should be. You're on pace for a full shifter term, which runs closer to 11 months than the human 9, and the power I sensed before." She paused, her expression thoughtful. "It's responding to the bond, to the king's presence. Whatever your daughter carries in her blood, it recognizes him." "But how? He's not her father. Adrian was her father. And Adrian is gone." Helene's voice was gentle but matter-of-fact. "The child needs protection. She needs power to shelter her. The bond you've formed with the king provides both." She pulled a blanket over Arya's legs, tucking it around her with maternal care. "Children are more perceptive than we give them credit for. Even unborn ones. Your daughter knows she's safe here. That's what matters." Helene paused at the door, turning back with an expression that was half curiosity, half unease. "One more thing. The power signature in your daughter. I've been searching the old records since we found you. The Thornwood line alone doesn't account for it. There's something else woven in. Something older. I believe your bloodline may carry the Ashenmore gift." Ashenmore? The name meant nothing to Arya. An ancient line, thought to have died out generations ago. Helene's eyes were sharp. "If I'm right, it means someone matched you with Adrian deliberately. 2 dormant lines, combined in a single child. That kind of convergence doesn't happen by accident." The implication settled over Arya like cold water. "You think someone planned this?" "I think someone knew what your daughter would become before she was ever conceived." Helene held her gaze for a long moment. "Sleep now. We'll speak more tomorrow." Arya wanted to argue, wanted to press for answers, but exhaustion was dragging at her eyelids, and the bed was soft, and for the first time in weeks, she wasn't afraid. She fell asleep to the sound of Helene humming a lullaby, her hand resting protectively over her belly, and dreamed of gray eyes shot through with gold. When she woke, it was dark, and she was alone. Or so she thought. A sound caught her attention, a quiet rustle from the direction of the door. Arya pushed herself upright, her heart immediately racing, visions of Dante's assassins flashing through her mind. She opened her mouth to scream, and stopped. Theron was sitting on the floor outside her chamber, his massive frame wedged into the narrow space between the door and the wall. His eyes were closed, his breathing even, and in the faint light seeping under the door, Arya could see that he'd been there for hours. His clothing was rumpled, his hair disheveled, and there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleeplessness. He was keeping vigil. Arya's hand flew to her mouth, stifling the gasp that tried to escape. She should have been frightened. This was the Alpha King, a stranger, a male she had known for less than a day. Instead, she felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something dangerously close to comfort. Slowly, quietly, she slipped from the bed and padded to the door. She opened it just a crack, just enough to peer through, and Theron's eyes snapped open immediately. Arya! He was on his feet in an instant, alarm flashing across his features. What's wrong? Is it the baby? Are you— I'm fine. She pulled the robe tighter around herself, suddenly aware of how thin the fabric was. I heard a noise. I wanted to see what it was. Theron's expression shifted from alarm to something that might have been embarrassment. I didn't mean to wake you. I was trying to be quiet. You're sitting on the floor outside my room in the middle of the night. Arya's voice was soft, bewildered. Why? For a long moment he didn't answer. His gray eyes, fully gray now, with no trace of gold, studied her face, and she saw something vulnerable flicker through them. I can feel you, he said finally, through the bond. Even though it's new, even though it isn't complete, I can feel what you're feeling. He paused, his jaw tightening. You were afraid. Earlier, when you were falling asleep, you were afraid, and it was like shards of glass in my chest, and I couldn't— He broke off, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I couldn't sleep knowing you were in there, frightened and alone, so I came to stand guard. Stand guard, Arya repeated slowly. Against what? Anything. Everything. His eyes met hers, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. Whatever hunts you, Arya, whatever drove you to run through the wilderness pregnant and alone, it will have to go through me to reach you. And I don't intend to let it get that far. Arya felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She barely knew this male. She shouldn't be affected by his words, by his presence, by the knowledge that he had spent hours sitting on a cold stone floor just to be near her. But she was. Gods help her, she was. You should sleep in a bed, she heard herself say. You're the Alpha King. You can't rule a kingdom if you're exhausted. I've been tired before. I've been tired for 4 centuries. His lips curved into something that was almost a smile. This is the first time it's been for a good reason. Arya didn't know how to respond to that. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a robe that wasn't hers, carrying a child that wasn't his, and felt the bond between them pulse with a warmth that threatened to undo her entirely. Go back to sleep, Theron said gently. I'll be here if you need me. She should have protested, should have insisted he go to his own chambers, should have maintained some semblance of boundaries between them. Instead, she nodded, retreated back into her room, and fell asleep to the knowledge that the most powerful alpha in the realm was sitting outside her door, keeping her nightmares at bay with nothing but his presence. The days that followed were strange and unsettling and oddly wonderful. True to his word, Theron gave her space. He didn't push, didn't pressure, didn't demand anything from her that she wasn't ready to give. But he was always there, at breakfast in the great hall, where he ensured she was seated beside him, and her plate was piled high with the most nourishing foods. At the healer's examinations, where he hovered in the doorway, with barely concealed anxiety until Helene assured him the baby was thriving. In the gardens, where he walked beside her in comfortable silence while she stretched her legs and breathed fresh air for the first time in weeks. He was courting her, Arya realized. Courting her with patience and restraint, and 1,000 small kindnesses that wore away at her defenses like water wearing away at stone. On the 3rd day, something happened that changed everything. Arya was in the great hall, eating her midday meal at the long table reserved for the king's household, when a noblewoman swept into the seat beside her with practiced grace. Lady Vivian Ashford, Southern Territory aristocracy, sleek dark hair, a smile that showed all her teeth. She radiated warmth and concern that seemed too polished to be genuine. "You poor dear," Vivian said, resting a manicured hand on Arya's arm. "I have heard what happened to you. Widowed and hunted. How terrifying. You must feel so out of place here among all these nobles." "I'm managing," Arya said carefully. "Of course you are. You're so brave." Vivian's smile widened. "And the king is so charitable taking you in. He's always had a soft spot for strays." The word landed like a quiet slap. Arya searched Vivian's face but found only practiced sympathy. Over the next 2 days, Vivian attached herself to Arya like a shadow. She introduced Arya to other court ladies, always with a slight emphasis. "This is the rogue the king found in the snow." She offered to help Arya choose appropriate clothing, implying her current dresses were embarrassing. She praised Theron's generosity in front of other nobles until the subtext was unmistakable. Arya was a charity case, not a future Luna. It was Helene who opened Arya's eyes. "She's been writing to 3 southern packs," the healer said bluntly, finding Arya alone in the library. "Positioning herself as a candidate for Luna. She's telling anyone who'll listen that the bond is a passing fancy, that the king will tire of his little rescue project and need a proper mate from a proper bloodline." Arya's hands trembled on the book in her lap. This was worse than Henshaw's cruelty. Henshaw had been a blunt weapon. Vivian was a knife slipped between the ribs with a smile. "What do I do?" she whispered. "You could tell the king. He'd banish her within the hour." "No." The words surprised Arya herself. "If I run to Theron every time someone undermines me, they'll never see me as anything but the rogue who hides behind the Alpha King." Helene's eyes gleamed with something that looked like pride. "Then what will you do?" Arya found Vivian at dinner that evening, surrounded by her usual audience of court ladies. She sat down directly across from her, and the table went quiet. "Lady Vivian," Arya said, her voice steady and clear enough to carry. "I understand you've been corresponding with several southern packs about the Luna position. I thought you should know. The position isn't vacant." Vivian's smile froze. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." Arya held her gaze without blinking. "You've been very kind to me since you arrived. So kind that it took me a few days to notice what you were actually doing." She let the silence stretch. "I don't blame you for trying, but I won't pretend I don't see it either." The court ladies exchanged wide-eyed glances. Vivian's composure cracked. Just for a moment. Just a flash of fury behind her carefully constructed mask, before she recovered. "You're reading too much into simple friendship, dear." "Perhaps, but those letters you've been sending should probably stop." From the head of the table, Arya felt Theron's gaze on her. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Through the bond, she felt his surprise shift into something fierce and warm, not the protective rage he'd shown before, but something better. Respect. Vivian left court the next morning, her entourage trailing behind her in tight-lipped silence. No one banished her. No one had to. Arya had handled it herself, and the court had watched her do it. That evening, Theron found her in the library. "You didn't need me today," he said, leaning against the doorframe with an expression she hadn't seen before. Half wonder, half amusement. "I needed to prove that to myself." "You proved it to everyone." He crossed to her chair and knelt beside it, bringing his eyes level with hers. "You know what you did today? You showed this court that you aren't just the Alpha King's mate. You're their Luna. In your own right." Arya felt her walls shift, not crumbling under force, but opening like a door she had chosen to unlock. She didn't know what she felt for this male. She didn't know if it was the bond or gratitude or something more, but she knew, with sudden clarity, that she was no longer running. She was staying. She was home. The days that followed were the strangest of Arya's life. She had expected the Alpha King's declaration to change things, and it had, but not in the ways she anticipated. The nobles who remained at court treated her with careful deference now, their eyes sliding away when she entered a room, their conversations dying to whispers before resuming with forced cheerfulness. No one dared insult her directly. No one dared even look at her too long. But it was Theron himself who confused her most. He did not press his advantage. He did not remind her that she was his mate, did not demand the closeness that the bond entitled him to. Instead, he simply was there, at meals, sitting beside her with quiet attention, in the corridors, appearing as if by magic whenever she ventured from her chambers, in the library where she spent her afternoons, reading by the fire while he worked through stacks of correspondence at a nearby desk. "You don't have to guard me constantly," she told him one afternoon, a week after her arrival at the keep. "I'm sure you have more important things to do than watch me read." Theron looked up from his papers, a slight crease between his brows. "I'm not guarding you." "Then what would you call it?" He was quiet for a moment, his pen stilling against the parchment. "I would call it not wanting to be anywhere else." Arya felt her cheeks flush and quickly returned her attention to her book, though the words swam before her eyes. The baby kicked, a sharp jab against her ribs, and she pressed a hand to her belly without thinking. "Is she moving?" Theron's voice was different now, softer, almost wondering. Arya looked up to find him watching her hand, an expression on his face she couldn't quite read. "She's always moving. I think she's going to be a warrior. She never stops fighting." "May I?" The question hung in the air between them. Arya's heart stuttered. This was different from the other touches they'd shared, the moments when he'd steadied her, caught her, held her during the night terrors that still plagued her sleep. This was asking for intimacy, asking to connect with the child that was not his. "Yes," she heard herself say. Theron rose from his chair and crossed the space between them, kneeling beside her seat just as he had in the great hall. His hand hovered over her belly, waiting, and she reached out and guided it to where the baby was kicking. His palm was warm through the thin fabric of her gown, warm and large, and impossibly gentle. Arya watched his face as the baby delivered another powerful kick, directly against his hand. Wonder transformed his features. The hard lines of the Alpha King softened, his whole expression opening, his lips parting on a soft exhale. For a moment he looked almost young, not the ancient battle-hardened ruler, but a male experiencing something miraculous for the first time. "Strong," he breathed. "So strong. She will be a warrior indeed." "She recognizes you." The words slipped out before Arya could stop them, and she felt her face heat again at their implication. "I mean, she's never this active with strangers, only with the healers, and now with me." Theron's thumb traced a small circle against her belly, and the baby responded with another kick, as if reaching for his touch. "Hello, little one. I'm going to keep you safe. Both of you. I swear it on my crown and my life." The sincerity in his voice made Arya's throat tight. She blinked rapidly, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. This was everything Adrian would have wanted for their daughter. A father figure who would protect her, love her, fight for her. But Adrian was dead, and this male was a stranger, and everything was happening too fast. "I should rest," she managed, pulling away. "The healer said I need to rest." Theron withdrew his hand immediately, rising to his feet and stepping back to give her space. His expression was carefully neutral, but she caught the flicker of hurt in his eyes before he masked it. "Of course. I'll walk you to your chambers." "That's not necessary." "Arya." He said her name softly, almost pleadingly. Please, let me. She didn't have the strength to refuse him. She didn't have the strength to keep fighting the pull between them when every part of her wanted to surrender. So she nodded and let him help her to her feet and walked beside him through the corridors while her heart waged war against her head. They were passing the great hall when a guard intercepted them, holding a sealed letter at arm's length as though it might bite. Your Majesty, a raven from the eastern border. It bears the Thornwood seal. Theron took the letter, broke the seal, and read in silence. Arya watched the color drain from his face and then flood back as hot fury. What does it say? She whispered. He hesitated, then handed it to her. The handwriting was elegant, almost beautiful, and utterly chilling. Brother Theron, I believe you have something that belongs to me, a female, and her pup. I raised them both, after a fashion, fed them, sheltered them, and now they've wandered off. I'm sure you understand a man wants his property returned. I'll be collecting them shortly. Consider this a courtesy. DT. Arya's hands shook so badly the letter rattled. She remembered that handwriting. Dante had left a note pinned to Adrian's body. I gave him the chance to share. He chose poorly. He's coming, she said, her voice thin. He's announcing himself. Theron took the letter back and crushed it in his fist. Which means he wants us afraid. He wants us to hand you over before he arrives. His jaw tightened. He will be disappointed. They continued walking in tense silence. They were halfway to her chambers when Helene intercepted them. The healer's face was drawn, her usual calm shattered by something that looked like fear. She bobbed a hasty curtsy to Theron before turning to Arya, gripping her hands with urgent strength. My lady, you need to come with me. Now. What's wrong? Arya felt the baby stir, responding to her spike of alarm. Is it the child? Is something... The child is fine. Helene's eyes darted to Theron, then back to Arya. But there's been word from the eastern border. A delegation has arrived, demanding an audience with the king. They say... She swallowed hard. They say they've come to collect what belongs to them. The blood drained from Arya's face. She knew. Before Helene said the name, before Theron's growl vibrated through the corridor, before the world tilted beneath her feet, she knew. Who? Theron's voice was ice and iron. Dante Thornwood, Helene whispered. He's brought an army. He says the Alpha King is harboring his brother's stolen property, and he wants it returned. The corridor seemed to narrow around Arya, the walls pressing in, the air growing thick and unbreathable. She heard herself make a small wounded sound, heard Theron curse savagely in the old tongue, felt strong arms catch her as her knees buckled. I've got you. Theron's voice was rough with fury, but his hands were gentle as he steadied her. I've got you, Arya. Look at me. She forced her eyes to focus on his face, using his steady presence as an anchor against the terror threatening to drown her. He found me. Her voice was barely a whisper. He found me. And now he's going to take the baby. He's going to kill me. He's going to die. Theron's jaw was set like granite, his wolf bleeding into every line of his face. He has made a grave mistake coming here. He has made the last mistake of his miserable life. You don't understand. Arya gripped his arms, her fingers digging into the hard muscle beneath his tunic. Dante isn't like other wolves. He killed Adrian, his own brother. He has no honor, no mercy, no limits to what he'll do. If he wants the baby badly enough to bring an army here, it's because he needs her. The blood ritual... She choked on the words, unable to finish. Blood ritual? Theron's brow furrowed. What blood ritual? Helene stepped forward, her expression grave. Your Majesty, this is what I've been trying to tell you. What the child carries, the ancient power we sensed, it's not just a gift. It's a key. There are old magics, forbidden magics, that require the blood of those who carry the original wolf bloodlines. If this Dante knows about the baby's power, he'll try to sacrifice her. Theron's voice was flat with horror. He'll kill an innocent child for power. Not just power. Arya forced herself to speak, though every word felt like swallowing broken glass. Alpha King power. The kind you have. The kind that can only be taken, not given. Dante doesn't just want to rule a single pack, he wants to rule everything, and my daughter is his path to that. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Theron moved, and Arya found herself pressed against his chest, his arms wrapped around her with fierce protectiveness. His heart hammered against her ear, fast but steady, a warrior's heart preparing for battle. He will not touch you, Theron said against her hair. He will not touch the child. I will tear him apart with my bare hands before I let him within 100 feet of either of you. Arya wanted to believe him. She wanted to let his certainty wash over her, wanted to trust that this powerful male could protect her from the monster who haunted her nightmares. But she had trusted before. She had believed Adrian would keep her safe, and now Adrian was dead. He has an army, she whispered. How many wolves? My scouts report 200, Helene said reluctantly. All loyal Thornwood wolves. They're camped at the border, waiting for the king's response to their demands. Their demands? Theron's voice dripped contempt. What exactly does this creature demand? The return of his brother's mate and heir. He claims Arya belongs to him now, as is the custom in some of the older packs. When an alpha dies, his brother inherits. I know the custom. Theron pulled back to look at Arya, his expression fierce. It's a barbaric tradition that has no place in my kingdom. You are not property to be passed from one male to another. You are not a broodmare to be claimed by whoever has the strength to take you. You are my mate, my Luna, and I will burn this world to ashes before I let anyone take you from me. The intensity in his eyes made Arya's breath catch. The bond between them flared, hot and bright, sending warmth flooding through her veins. For a moment she forgot to be afraid. For a moment, all she felt was safe. Then reality crashed back in. 200 wolves, she said shakily. Even for an alpha king, that's nothing. Theron's smile was sharp and dangerous, the smile of a predator who had just scented prey. I have 10,000 warriors spread across this kingdom's garrisons. Messengers are already riding to recall the nearest regiments. This Dante has signed his own death warrant by bringing his little army to my doorstep. You can't start a war over me. Arya shook her head, panic rising in her chest. People will die. Your people. Innocent people. I won't have that blood on my hands. The blood will be on his hands, not yours. Theron cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me, Arya. Before you came, I was an empty throne with a heartbeat. Duty without purpose. Then you appeared, and everything changed. The bond awakened. My heart awakened. For the first time in longer than I can measure, I feel alive. Do you understand what that means? Arya couldn't speak. She could only stare at him, drowning in the golden depths of his eyes. It means I would walk away from this throne tonight if it kept you safe. Theron continued, his voice rough with emotion. And I have never said that about anything. Ever. He pressed his forehead to hers, breathing her in, and Arya felt the last of her resistance crumble. She was falling. Despite everything, despite her grief for Adrian, despite her fear of the bond, despite all the walls she had tried to keep between them, she was falling for this fierce, protective, impossibly devoted male. And she didn't know if she could stop it. She didn't know if she wanted to. What do we do? She whispered. First, we secure the castle. Theron's voice shifted back to command, though his hands remained gentle on her face. Helene, I want Arya moved to the inner chambers. Double the guard on every entrance. No one approaches her without my explicit permission. Yes, Your Majesty. Then I will ride to the eastern outpost. It's less than 2 miles from the keep. I will hear what this Dante has to say, and I will make it very clear what happens to wolves who threaten my mate. Arya grabbed his arm as he turned to leave. You're not going alone. You can't. I'll bring a regiment. This is not a battle. It's a message. And I'll be close. Close enough to return in minutes if you need me. He covered her hand with his, squeezing gently. I need you to trust me, Arya. Can you do that? She thought of the nights he had spent outside her door. She thought of the respect in his eyes when she'd faced down Vivian alone. She thought of his palm against her belly, his voice promising to keep them safe. Yes, she said softly. I trust you. The smile he gave her was worth all the fear, all the uncertainty, all the chaos of the past weeks. It transformed his face, making him look young and hopeful and desperately in love. I'll return before nightfall, he promised. Wait for me. Then he was gone, striding down the corridor with purpose in every step, and Arya was left with Helene and the terrifying knowledge that her past had finally caught up with her. The hours crawled by like years. Arya paced her chambers, the inner chambers now, deeper within the castle, surrounded by guards at every door, until her feet ached and her back screamed in protest. Helene brought her tea that she couldn't drink, food that she couldn't eat, books that she couldn't read. The baby kicked constantly, responding to her mother's distress, and Arya pressed her hands to her belly and whispered soothing nonsense that neither of them believed. Tell me about him, she said finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. The king. Theron. What was he like before? Helene looked up from her needlework, her expression thoughtful. Before you arrived, you mean? Yes. The healer set down her work, considering the question. He was cold, distant. He ruled with fairness and strength, but there was no warmth in him. The servants called him the Ice King behind his back. They said his heart had frozen centuries ago and would never thaw. Arya thought of the way he looked at her, all fire and longing and desperate hope. He doesn't seem cold to me. That's because you melted him. Helene's smile was gentle. The moment you arrived, something changed. The castle itself seemed to warm, and the king? She shook her head in wonder. I have served the Shadowfang throne for nearly 200 years, my lady. I have never seen him smile until you. I have never seen him laugh. I have never seen him care about anything beyond duty. You have given him something precious, something he never thought he would have. I didn't give him anything. The bond reveals truth. It doesn't create feelings from nothing. Helene leaned forward, her eyes intent. What you feel for him, what he feels for you, those emotions were always possible. The bond simply opened the door. Whether you walk through it is your choice. Before Arya could respond, a commotion erupted outside the chamber door. Shouting voices, running feet, the clash of steel against steel. Then, a sickening crack, and the sounds of struggle stopped abruptly. Arya shot to her feet, her heart hammering. What's happening? Helene was already moving, pressing Arya toward the inner room where a narrow window overlooked the courtyard below. Stay here, don't move. But the chamber door burst open, kicked from its hinges. Through the doorframe, Arya caught a glimpse of the doubled guard crumpled in the corridor, taken from behind. The assassins had come up through the old servants' tunnels beneath the eastern wing, bypassing the guarded corridors entirely. A wolf stood in the doorway, not a man, but a wolf in full shift, massive and dark-furred with murder in its golden eyes. It snarled, bloody foam dripping from its jaws, and Arya knew with sickening certainty that this was one of Dante's assassins. Helene stepped between them, her hands raised, power crackling at her fingertips. You will not touch her, The wolf laughed, a horrible, human sound from an animal throat. The master only wants the child. Give us the child, and the female can live. No. Arya's voice rang out stronger than she felt. You can't have her. You can't have either of us. The wolf's eyes fixed on her, and it smiled, a grotesque expression on a lupine face. Then you'll both die, and the master will take what he wants from your corpse. It lunged. Helene's power flared, a shield of silver light erupting between them and the attacking wolf. The creature slammed into it with a yelp of pain, but the shield flickered, weakened. Helene was strong, but she was a healer, not a warrior. She couldn't hold forever. More wolves poured through the door. 3, 4, 5. Too many for Helene to stop. Arya backed away, one hand on her belly, the other groping for anything she could use as a weapon. Her fingers closed around a candlestick, heavy iron, better than nothing, and she raised it with trembling hands. Stay away from us, she said, her voice shaking. The king will kill you all. The king isn't here. The lead wolf shifted back to human form, a scarred, brutal-looking male with cruel eyes. And by the time he returns, you'll be long gone. Master Dante sends his regards. He stepped toward her, reaching out with clawed hands. But Helene's shield flared again, weaker this time, flickering like a guttering candle. The lead assassin slammed against it, staggered, then threw himself at it again. Each impact dimmed the silver light further. Helene was shaking with the effort, blood trickling from her nose. I can't hold much longer, she gasped. The shield shattered. The assassin lunged through the gap, and then he was flying backward, slammed against the wall by a force that seemed to come from nowhere. Arya gasped, looking down at her own hands in shock. They were glowing, not faintly this time, but blazing with golden light that pulsed in time with the baby's frantic kicks. The power that Helene had sensed, the ancient bloodline stirring in her daughter's veins, was pouring through Arya like a conduit, stronger than before, as if the baby was lending her mother everything she had. What? The other wolves hesitated, their eyes fixed on the light. The child, one of them whispered, fear creeping into his voice. The master said the child had power, but— Take her! The lead assassin snarled, staggering to his feet. Take her now, before— A roar shattered the night. The window behind Arya exploded inward, and suddenly there was a wolf in the room, but not one of Dante's. This wolf was enormous, silver-furred and golden-eyed, radiating power that made the air itself vibrate with terror. Theron. He tore through the assassins like they were made of paper. Blood sprayed, bones crunched, screams cut short by savage jaws. It was over in seconds. 5 wolves reduced to broken corpses on the chamber floor. Then he shifted, and Theron stood before her in human form, naked and blood-soaked and shaking with rage. Are you hurt? His hands ran over her frantically, checking for wounds. Arya, are you hurt? The baby? We're fine. Arya clutched at him, not caring about the blood, not caring about anything except that he was here. He was real. He had saved them. We're fine. We're fine. I knew. His voice cracked. I felt your fear through the bond. I left the regiment at the outpost and ran. 2 miles in wolf form, fast as I've ever moved. I thought I would be too late. You weren't. She pressed her face to his chest, breathing him in, pine and musk and safety. You're here. I'll always be here. His arms closed around her, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Always, Arya. I swear it. Behind them, Helene was already calling for guards, for healers, for someone to remove the bodies. The castle erupted into controlled chaos as word spread of the assassination attempt. But Arya heard none of it. All she heard was Theron's heartbeat beneath her ear, and the 3 words he whispered against her hair like a prayer. Mine. my mate. And she knew, with certainty that went bone deep, that the true battle was only beginning. The dawn brought no peace. Arya stood at the window of her chamber, watching the eastern sky bleed crimson and gold over the snow-covered mountains. 3 days had passed since the assassination attempt. 3 days of heightened security and whispered counsels and Theron's constant, hovering presence. He had barely left her side, sleeping in a chair by her door when she insisted she needed privacy, pacing the corridors when meetings demanded his attention elsewhere. She should have felt safe. She should have felt protected. Instead, she felt the storm gathering. Her hands rested on her belly, feeling the baby shift and kick with increasing urgency. 8 months along now, her body heavy and aching, but the child inside her seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. The healers spoke of it in hushed, reverent tones, the old bloodline awakening, power stirring in the womb. Arya didn't fully understand what it meant, but she felt it. A warmth that pulsed beneath her skin when danger drew near. A light that wanted to break free. The door opened behind her, and she didn't need to turn to know who it was. The mate bond hummed with his presence, a golden thread connecting her heart to his. "You should be resting," Theron said, his voice rough with exhaustion. He hadn't slept more than a few hours since the attack. She could feel his weariness through the bond, feel how he pushed through it with sheer force of will. "I can't rest." Arya turned to face him, taking in the dark circles beneath his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands flexed at his sides as if reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. "Something's coming. I can feel it." He crossed to her in 3 long strides, his hands finding her arms, drawing her close. "Dante's army was spotted at the northern pass this morning. 200 wolves, maybe more. They'll reach the castle by nightfall." Arya's blood ran cold. "So soon?" "He's desperate." Theron's jaw was tight, his eyes blazing with fury barely contained. "The assassination failed. He knows we're fortified now, knows every day that passes gives us more time to prepare. He's gambling everything on a direct assault. He's gambling on the baby." Arya's voice was steady, though her heart raced. "The blood ritual. That's what this has always been about." Theron's arms tightened around her. "He will never touch you. Never touch our child. I will tear out his throat before he draws within 100 yards of these walls. Our child." The words sent warmth flooding through her, even now, even with terror clawing at her chest. Theron had never hesitated to claim the baby as his own, never treated her daughter as anything less than precious. Adrian's blood ran in her veins, but Theron's love would shape her life, if they survived the night. "I'm not hiding," Arya said, meeting his gaze with determination that surprised even herself. "Whatever happens tonight, I won't cower in some cellar while you fight for us. I won't be helpless." "Arya, no." She pressed her palm to his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her touch. "The power in me, in our daughter. It's real. I felt it during the attack. The assassins felt it. If Dante wants this bloodline so badly, maybe it's time he learned what it can do." Theron stared at her for a long moment, emotions warring across his face, fear for her safety, pride in her courage, and beneath it all, that fierce, possessive love that had terrified her when they first met and now anchored her to the world. "You are the most stubborn female I have ever known," he said finally, a ghost of a smile crossing his lips. "And you love me for it." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she felt heat flood her cheeks. They hadn't spoken of love yet. The mate bond was one thing, primal, undeniable, beyond choice, but love was a different matter entirely. Love was what she had felt for Adrian, what she thought she could never feel again. Theron's breath caught. His hands came up to cup her face, tilting her chin so she had no choice but to meet his eyes. "Yes," he said, his voice hoarse. I do. More than duty, more than honor, more than my own life. You are everything, Arya. You and the child you carry. Whatever happens tonight, know that you have given me more joy in these few weeks than I ever thought I would feel again. Arya's breath hitched. Theron, when this is over, he continued, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating tenderness, I want to claim you properly. Not because the bond demands it, but because I choose you. Because I will always choose you. She surged up on her toes and kissed him, pouring everything she couldn't say into the press of her lips against his. He groaned against her mouth, his arms wrapping around her, holding her as close as her swollen belly would allow. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. Survive tonight, she whispered. Promise me. I promise. His voice was fierce, unbreakable. And you promise me the same. I promise. The war horns sounded at sunset. Arya stood on the castle battlements, wrapped in a fur-lined cloak against the bitter wind, watching the dark tide of wolves pour through the valley below. Torches blazed in the gathering darkness, illuminating the banners of the Thornwood Pack, the pack that should have been her family, that had become her nightmare. At the head of the army, a single figure rode a massive black horse. Even from this distance, Arya recognized Dante's cruel silhouette, the arrogant set of his shoulders, the way he surveyed the castle walls as if already picturing his victory. There must be close to 300 of them now, Helene murmured beside her, the old healer's face grave. More joined during the march. Wolves who scent power and want to be on the winning side. Theron's voice was ice and iron. He stood at Arya's other side, fully armored now, his sword at his hip, and his wolf prowling just beneath his skin. They'll scatter when Dante falls. If he falls, one of his generals muttered. Theron's head snapped around, his wolf surging behind his gaze. He will fall. Tonight. This ends. Arya felt the baby kick hard, felt that strange warmth pulse through her veins. The power was stirring again, responding to the danger, to the enemy at their gates. She pressed her hand to her belly and whispered silently to her daughter. Stay calm, little one. Whatever happens, stay calm. The assault began without warning. One moment, the enemy army stood motionless at the base of the walls. The next, they were surging forward, wolves shifting mid-charge, a howling mass of teeth and claws crashing against the castle defenses like a living wave. Theron kissed Arya once, hard and desperate, then vaulted over the battlements to join his warriors below. She watched him land with inhuman grace, watched him shift into his massive silver wolf form and tear into the attackers with savage efficiency. Bodies fell around him, blood stained the snow, and still, the enemy kept coming. We should get you inside, Helene urged, tugging at Arya's arm. The inner chambers are fortified. No. Arya's voice rang with a certainty she didn't fully understand. I need to be here. I need to see. The battle raged for what felt like hours. Arya watched from the walls, her heart in her throat, as Theron and his warriors fought with desperate ferocity. Dante had been more cunning than anyone anticipated. His wolves had torched the mountain bridges and collapsed the northern pass behind them as they advanced, cutting off the garrison reinforcements Theron had summoned. The messengers had never made it through. He's burned his own way home, Helene murmured beside her. He wins here, or dies here. Only the castle guard and Theron's personal regiment held the line, 300 against 300, and for every enemy that fell, the Thornwood wolves fought with the savage desperation of those who knew their master's cruelty awaited failure. The Shadowfang defenders were being pushed back toward the castle gates. And then she saw him. Dante wasn't fighting with his wolves. He had circled around the battle, slipping through the chaos while attention focused on the main assault. Now he stood at the base of the eastern tower. The guards who should have held that position lay crumpled behind him, taken out silently while the battle raged elsewhere. Dante had planned this perfectly, drawing the bulk of the defense to the front while he struck from the shadows. He looked up, and their eyes met. Even across the distance, Arya felt the malice in his gaze, the hunger, the absolute certainty that she belonged to him, that everything she carried would soon be his to claim. "Master Dante is breaching the eastern tower," a guard shouted, but it was too late. Dante was already through the door, already climbing toward her, and the battle below had pulled too many defenders away. Arya didn't think. She ran. Her heavy body protested every step as she descended from the battlements and raced through the castle corridors. Servants and guards tried to stop her, tried to steer her toward safety, but she pushed past them all. She knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that she needed to face Dante herself. That this confrontation had been coming since the moment he murdered Adrian and set her running. She reached the throne room just as Dante emerged from the eastern stairwell. He was larger than she remembered, his body honed for violence, his handsome face twisted into something monstrous by ambition and madness. Blood stained his hands and spattered his clothes, guards he had killed on his way up, wolves who had tried to stop him. Little Arya. His voice was a mockery of warmth, the false affection of a predator playing with its prey. "You've led me on quite the chase. Stay back." Arya's voice shook, but she held her ground. The throne room was vast and empty, torchlight flickering across stone walls. The Alpha King's seat looming behind her like a silent witness. Dante laughed, spreading his bloody hands wide. "Or what? You'll call for your new mate? He's a bit busy at the moment, I'm afraid. My wolves are keeping him quite occupied. I don't need him to deal with you." The words surprised even Arya, but as they left her lips, she felt something shift inside her. The warmth that had pulsed through her veins during the assassination attempt began to build, brighter, stronger, responding to her fear and her fury. Dante's eyes narrowed. "The child's power?" "Yes. I imagine your healers have pieced it together by now. The Ashenmore line, hiding in a nameless orphan." His smile sharpened. "They're right, by the way. I had your blood tested years before you ever met Adrian. You carry the gift they thought died out centuries ago." The confirmation of Helene's suspicion hit Arya like a fist. She had hoped the healer was wrong, had prayed it was coincidence, but Dante's next words killed that hope entirely. "Why do you think I pushed him toward you, little Arya? Why do you think I encouraged the match? You bred us like livestock." The words tasted like ash. "From the beginning." Dante's voice was almost gentle now, the way a spider might be gentle with a fly. "My brother was always the chosen heir, the favored son. But I knew if I matched him with the right female, if two dormant bloodlines combined in a single child, I could take everything. His mate, his child, his power. All of it. Mine. You killed him." Tears burned Arya's eyes, grief and rage twisting together in her chest. "He was your brother, and you killed him." "He was in my way." Dante shrugged, utterly unmoved. "Just as you're in my way now. But don't worry, you won't suffer. The ritual requires the child's blood, not yours. Once I've taken what I need, you can die quickly. A mercy, really, considering what you've put me through." He lunged. Arya didn't run. She stood her ground, both hands pressed to her belly, and she reached for the warmth that pulsed beneath her skin. She thought of Adrian, murdered, protecting her. She thought of Theron, fighting for her even now. She thought of her daughter, the innocent life that Dante wanted to sacrifice for his own twisted ambitions. No. Light exploded from her hands. Golden, blinding, ancient. The power that had slumbered in the Thornwood bloodline for generations erupted outward in a wave of protective fury. It slammed into Dante mid-leap and sent him flying backward, crashing against the stone wall with a crack of breaking bone. The mate bond with Theron was fueling it. She understood that now. During the assassination attempt, the power had been a raw, instinctive surge she couldn't control or direct. But in the week since, the bond had deepened with every dawn spent together, every touch, every whispered promise. It had grown roots. And now Theron's strength flowed through that bond and into her daughter's ancient bloodline, amplifying what had been a defensive spark into something vast and deliberate. Together, they formed something neither could have been alone. Arya didn't stop there. She felt the power reaching beyond her, felt it spreading through the castle, through the battlefield outside. She felt it touch the wolves fighting for Dante, felt the false bonds of loyalty that bound them to him, chains forged through fear and threat and blood magic. And she broke them. The sensation was overwhelming, 100 connections snapping at once. Outside, she heard the howls of confusion as wolves suddenly found themselves free, suddenly remembered that they had chosen to follow Dante out of terror rather than love. She felt them scatter, felt them flee, felt the tide of battle shift in an instant. Dante staggered to his feet, blood streaming from his nose, his eyes wild with disbelief. "What did you do? What did you do?" "I freed them." Arya's voice was steady now, power still crackling at her fingertips. "They were never yours. Not really. And neither am I." Dante snarled and shifted, or tried to. The transformation stuttered, failed. He stared at his hands in horror as nothing happened, as the wolf that should have risen refused to answer his call. "The bloodline power." His voice cracked with sudden fear. "It stripped my connection. I can't shift." "You're nothing now." Arya stepped toward him, and for the first time, Dante Thornwood scrambled backward in retreat. No pack, no power, no wolf. Just a murderer who thought he could take whatever he wanted. The throne room doors crashed open. Theron stormed in, human again but still bloody from battle, his gaze finding Arya first. Always her first, before locking onto Dante with murderous intent. "We're unharmed," Arya said quickly, one hand still raised, power still ready. "And his wolves have scattered. They're free of him." Theron's gaze swept over her, checking for injuries, before settling on Dante with cold, absolute finality. "Then there's only one matter left to settle." Dante tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Theron was on him, moving with inhuman speed, his hand closing around Dante's throat and lifting him off the ground. "Wait," Arya said. Both men froze, Dante choking in Theron's grip, Theron's claws already extending toward the killing blow. Arya walked forward until she stood before the man who had destroyed her world, the man who had murdered her mate, hunted her across kingdoms, sent assassins to kill her and steal her child. She looked into his eyes and felt nothing but cold, clear certainty. "You were always too weak," Dante rasped, bloody foam at his lips. "Just like Adrian, sentiment and softness, that's all either of you ever had." "Adrian died protecting me," Arya said quietly. "He died with honor, with love, with courage. You'll die alone, unmourned, and forgotten." She stepped back and nodded to Theron. His claws tore through Dante's chest before the words finished leaving her lips. Dante's eyes went wide with shock, then dimmed. His final words came out as a wet gurgle. "The bloodline should have been mine." Then he was still, and Theron let his body fall. The aftermath was a blur of healers and guards, explanations and embraces. The remaining enemy wolves had surrendered or fled. Theron's forces had suffered losses, but nothing that couldn't be recovered. And Arya, somehow, was still standing. Exhausted beyond measure, the golden power finally fading from her veins, but alive, unbroken. It was hours before they were finally alone. The battle was won, the bodies were cleared, and the castle had settled into an uneasy peace. Arya sat on the edge of her bed. Their bed now, she supposed, while Theron knelt before her, checking her for injuries with the obsessive thoroughness he had shown since the moment Dante fell. "I'm fine," she said for the 100th time, catching his hands in hers. "We're both fine." Theron lifted her hands to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "You terrified me tonight. When I saw you facing him alone. I had to. You understand that, don't you?" He was silent for a long moment, studying her face with an expression she couldn't read. Then he exhaled and nodded. "You were magnificent. Terrifying, but magnificent. The power you wielded. Our daughter's power." Arya pressed her palm to her belly, feeling the baby settle into peaceful stillness. "She saved us both. She is going to be extraordinary." Theron's hand covered hers, warm and protective, like her mother. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the night pressing down on them. So much had been lost. So much had been gained. Arya thought of Adrian, wondered if he could see her now, wondered if he understood that she had found a way forward through the grief. "Thank you," she thought to him, wherever he was. "Thank you for loving me first, for giving me the strength to survive." "Arya." Theron's voice had dropped, roughened with something that made her pulse quicken. "Before the battle, I said, I want to claim you, to mark you as mine." Her breath caught. "I remember. I meant every word." He reached up, cupping her face in his hands with infinite gentleness. "But I need you to understand. I'm not asking because of duty. I'm not asking because the bond demands it. I'm asking because I love you. Because the thought of living without you is unbearable. Because you are my mate in every way that matters, and I want the world to know it." Tears spilled down Arya's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Theron, let me finish." His thumbs brushed away her tears. "If you're not ready, I'll wait. A month, a year, a decade, however long you need. But know that my heart is already yours. My wolf is already yours. Nothing will change that." "I don't want to wait." The words came out steady and sure, and Arya knew they were true. She had spent months running, hiding, grieving. She had earned this moment of choosing joy, choosing love, choosing a future instead of dwelling in the past. "I loved Adrian," she said softly. "A part of me always will. But you've shown me that my heart is bigger than I thought. That love doesn't divide, it multiplies. And when I look at you, when I feel you through the bond, I know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Theron made a rough sound, something between a groan and a prayer, and pulled her into his arms. His lips found hers, hungry and tender, claiming and reverent. Arya melted into him, her body pressing close despite the swell of her belly between them. "I want to mark you," he breathed against her lips. "I want everyone who sees you to know you're mine. Will you let me?" "Yes." The word was barely a whisper. "And I want to mark you too. I want it to be mutual. I want us to belong to each other." Theron's breath shuddered out of him. "Nothing would honor me more." He turned her gently, brushing her hair aside to expose the curve of her neck and shoulder. His lips traced the sensitive skin there, and Arya shivered, feeling her wolf rise for the first time in months, not in fear, but in anticipation, in welcome. "Ready?" His voice was strained with the effort of control. "Ready." His teeth sank into the junction of her neck and shoulder. Pain lanced through her, sharp and electric, and Arya cried out. But even as the cry left her lips, the pain was transforming, changing, becoming something else entirely. Warmth flooded through her veins, golden and brilliant, and she felt the bond between them ignite. It was like nothing she had ever experienced, not even with Adrian, not even during the moments of greatest connection. This was deeper, primal, complete. She felt Theron, not just his presence but his emotions, his very soul. She felt his love blazing like a sun, felt his fierce protectiveness, felt the vast emptiness that her presence had finally filled. She felt his wolf howling in triumph, felt his heart pounding in sync with hers. He withdrew his teeth gently, laving the wound with his tongue, and Arya sagged against him, overwhelmed by sensation. But she wasn't done. Not yet. My turn, she managed, and Theron shuddered. He tilted his head, offering his throat, the ultimate sign of trust from an alpha, the ultimate vulnerability. Arya rose on her knees, despite her tired body, despite the ache in her muscles. She pressed her lips to his shoulder first, feeling him tremble beneath her touch. Then she let her wolf guide her, let instinct take over. Her teeth pierced his skin. The bond roared. Through the connection, Arya felt what he felt, the sharp, bright pain transforming into pleasure, the primal satisfaction of being claimed, the overwhelming rightness of belonging to her completely. She tasted his blood on her tongue, felt the mark forming beneath her bite, felt the bond settle into something eternal and unbreakable. Mine. She breathed against his skin as she released him. Yours. He groaned in answer. Mate. They said it together, voices overlapping, the word resonating through the bond until it seemed to echo off the very walls. Theron pulled her into his arms, cradling her against his chest, both of them trembling with the aftermath of the claiming. The marks on their shoulders throbbed in perfect synchrony, already healing into the permanent sigils that would announce their union to the world. I felt you, Arya whispered, her hand pressed over his heart. I felt everything. Your love, your loneliness, your hope. And I felt yours. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. Your strength. Your grief transformed into courage. Your capacity for love that I never thought I would witness, let alone receive. They held each other as dawn began to lighten the windows, the bond humming settled and eternal between them. The baby kicked once, twice, then settled, as if she too could feel the change, the completion, the beginning of a new chapter. Sleep now, Theron murmured against her hair. You've fought enough battles for one night. Stay with me? Always. He settled them both against the pillows, his body curved protectively around hers, one hand resting on her belly where their daughter grew. Always, my mate. My love. My Luna. Arya closed her eyes and let sleep claim her, surrounded by safety, by warmth, by a love she had never expected to find again. The coronation took place 2 months later, on a brilliant winter morning when the sun blazed down on fresh snow and the entire kingdom gathered to witness history. Arya stood at the center of the great hall, dressed in silver and white, her belly now enormous as she neared her final days of pregnancy. The marking scars on her shoulder were visible above her gown's neckline, deliberately, proudly, a statement to all who saw them that she belonged to the Alpha King, and he to her. Theron stood beside her, resplendent in formal black, his gaze never leaving her face as the High Priestess recited the ancient words of the Luna ceremony. When the silver circlet was placed on Arya's head, the assembled wolves dropped to their knees in a wave of submission and respect. Rise, Arya Shadowfang, the priestess intoned, Luna Queen of the Northern Kingdom, mate to Alpha King Theron, protector of the sacred bloodline. The hall erupted in howls of celebration. Through the bond, Arya felt Theron's fierce pride and overwhelming love. She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together, and he brought her knuckles to his lips in full view of the crowd. You are everything. His voice spoke through the bond, words meant only for her. I never knew what was missing until you filled it. Neither did I, she sent back. But now I can't imagine any other life. The celebration continued through the day, feasting and dancing and political maneuvering as nobles sought to curry favor with the new Luna. But Arya barely noticed any of it. Her attention was focused inward, on the tightening sensation in her lower back, on the rhythmic pressure that was becoming harder to ignore. It was Helene who noticed first. The old healer appeared at Arya's elbow during a lull in the festivities, her eyes knowing. "It's time, isn't it?" Arya nodded, a smile breaking through her nervousness. "I think so." 20 hours later, as dawn broke once more over the mountains, Arya held her daughter in her arms for the first time. The baby was perfect. Small and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and the bright blue eyes that all newborns shared. But when she looked up at her mother, Arya saw something familiar there. A depth of spirit, a quiet strength that reminded her achingly of Adrian. "She has his eyes," Arya whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Or she will, when they change color." Theron knelt beside the bed, his massive frame somehow made gentle, one finger tracing the curve of the baby's cheek with impossible tenderness. "She's beautiful. She's ours. What shall we name her?" Helene asked from the doorway, her own eyes suspiciously bright. Arya looked at Theron, and through the bond she felt his willing to let her choose, his trust in whatever decision she made. She looked down at the baby in her arms, the child Adrian had died to protect, the child Theron had claimed as his own, the child whose power had helped save them all. "Aurora," she said finally. "Aurora Adriana Shadowfang, for the dawn that comes after the longest night." Theron's breath caught, understanding the significance, the tribute to Adrian woven into the naming. He pressed a kiss to Arya's temple, then to Aurora's tiny forehead. "Perfect," he murmured. "Absolutely perfect." A week after Aurora's birth, Arya made one final journey. The Silver Creek Clinic looked smaller than she remembered. Shabbier. The steps where she'd been shoved into the snow were cracked and uneven, and the healer's symbol above the door was faded almost beyond recognition. She stood before those steps in a fur-lined cloak bearing the Shadowfang crest, Aurora sleeping against her chest, a full royal escort at her back. The clinic door opened, and Henshaw emerged. He was grayer than before, his face hollowed by the weeks since word had reached Silver Creek that the pregnant rogue he'd thrown into the snow was now Luna Queen. He looked at Arya, at the circlet on her brow, at the baby in her arms, and the blood drained from his face. "Your Majesty," he whispered. I didn't know. You didn't care." Arya's voice was calm, steady. She had rehearsed fury. What came out instead was something quieter and far more devastating. "You looked at a freezing, pregnant woman begging for help, and you decided she wasn't worth 5 minutes of your time. Not because you didn't know who I was, because you didn't think it mattered." Henshaw opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Your license is revoked," Arya continued. "You will never practice healing again. The Silver Creek Pack will operate under royal oversight for 5 years, and a new healer, one who treats patients instead of judging them, will be installed by month's end." She turned away before he could respond. She didn't need his apology. She didn't need his fear. She needed him to understand that the woman he'd dismissed as roguish trash had walked through fire and come out the other side wearing a crown. Theron was waiting by the carriage, Aurora's blanket already warmed in his hands. "How do you feel?" he asked, searching her face. Arya considered the question. She thought of the woman she had been on these steps. Frozen, desperate, alone, begging a stranger for mercy that never came. She thought of the woman she was now, not because of the crown or the title or the power thrumming in her blood, because of the choices she had made, because she had kept walking when everything told her to stop. "I feel finished," she said, "with all of it. The running, the fear, the looking back." She settled into the carriage, tucking Aurora close. "Take us home." Theron climbed in beside her, one arm around her shoulders, the other resting on Aurora's back. The baby stirred, her eyes fluttering open, warm amber, Adrian's amber, and fixed on her mother's face, with a gaze that seemed to hold the wisdom of every bloodline that had conspired to create her. Arya kissed her daughter's forehead and let the carriage carry them north, toward the mountains, toward the keep, toward the life she had never expected and would never trade for anything. She had been rejected at a packed doctor's office, cast out into the snow like refuse. Now she was Luna Queen, mate to the Alpha King, mother to a miracle. And she had never been more home.